Good day, everyone. It is Thursday, November the 18th. I'm Martin Gagel with Market Radius Research. Today, we've got CEO Dan Legault of Antibe Therapeutics. Antibe has a proprietary hydrogen sulfide platform to address inflammation. Its lead drug, otenaproxesul, missed the mark in recent chronic pain trials, and the company has pivoted the drug to target acute postoperative pain and is planning for those studies to begin in 2022. I had Dan on the call earlier this year where he laid out the plan going forward, and I thought it would be good to have him back now that the company has assessed the results and taken that into a new direction. The company is in a strong cash position with $60 million cash reported at the end of September. And at current prices, it's trading well below its cash value. And I'm guessing a lot of investors are trying to figure out how productive Antibe can be with that cash on hand, and how the pivot into acute pain can be assessed in the trials going forward. So while we discussed valuation and so forth, this is neither a recommendation or investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. And Dan, thank you very much for joining us again. And so just everyone is up to speed. I think it would be good for you, Dan, to provide just in the audience a brief overview of Antibe and its core tech platform, and then give us a brief rundown what happened over the past 4 or 5 months, notably with the otenaproxesul program. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Sure. Hi, Martin, and a pleasure to be here again. So, of course, so we're a Toronto-based discovery company. We're on the senior stock exchange in Toronto, a classic biotech. Our lead drug targets pain and inflammation. We have a number of other drugs that are targeting pain and inflammation, and then we're broadly speaking going after the whole inflammatory market. Just inflammation underscores so many indications. It was my business partner and longtime friend, John Wallace, who made the original discovery that hydrogen sulfide is the body's key mediator or manager of inflammation, and that supports everything that we're doing. We're trying to leverage that discovery, and we've generated fantastic data to date. These aren't easy issues, but just tremendous data. We decided, John is also an expert in NSAIDs, nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the anti-inflammatory painkillers that you take, Martin, and that I take, and along with a couple of billion people on the world. The pain market.
The ibuprofens of the world.
The ibuprofens of the world, aspirin, Advil, that sort of thing. I mean, the pain market is the largest market, the largest drug market on the planet, and it's primarily made up of the opioids, which of course have their own problems, and the NSAIDs, which also have their own problems. The NSAIDs been around for 50 years. Aspirin's been around for 100. NSAIDs are well known to cause ulcers and bleeding in the gastrointestinal system, the stomach and the intestines. A very difficult problem to solve. Everyone has gone after it, including virtually all of big pharma, and probably 100 small companies. No one has managed to do it. We have. Our data clearly shows that we have solved that problem, but we're causing another one, or we're exacerbating another one. All NSAIDs also cause a rise in the not very harmful liver enzymes, but it's a signal of potential toxicity. They're all doing it over the long term in a small number of patients. We're doing it as well, and that led to our recent issues. We were originally going after the chronic market, which means you can take a drug every day for the rest of your life because it's larger, and the main indication being osteoarthritis. Since we are facing this issue in the longer term, and we weren't expecting at these lower doses, but we did see it in about more than 10% of people, just too much. So while we continue to work on that problem, we have pivoted to the acute market. Acute means, you take a drug for 14 days or less, usually 10 days or less. Still a massive market for which all of our data is relevant. So yes, our stock fell off a cliff. None of us are happy about that, but we do feel as if the market has misunderstood that a bit. Let's not forget that these are difficult issues. No one, all of big pharma, pretty much about 90% of big pharma went after this issue with 100 other companies. No one's been able to solve it. We have. We haven't been able to get our hands around that liver issue completely yet, but it's only in a small number of people for the longer term. And we think that it's a much less of a risk acute. So it would make an enormous amount of sense to pivot to the acute market. I mean, you know, Martin, if you had to design 2 large phase 2B trials for acute, let alone chronic, you'd be thrilled with the data we've generated. Very effective pain scores. So we have a powerful painkiller and dramatically good GI safety. That's what's needed in the acute pain market as well. The whole world wants to move away from opioids, and they want strong pain killing with and NSAIDs. The number one issue is GI safety. So we're going after that. We're starting with postoperative pain to begin with, a $13 billion market, and then we sort of call it a beachhead strategy. Then we'll land on the beaches and then take over the rest of Europe, so to speak, because there are so many other indications in acute, such as gout, migraine, normal trauma, like you break your rib or something like that, menstrual pain, which is called dysmenorrhea, that sort of thing. So I'll stop there, Martin, and I think that's a bit of an introduction to our company and the recent issues.
Yeah, that's perfect. I guess in terms of repurposing the drug for acute pain, I guess to be clear, there's no plans right now to reformulate the drug. That you still have to figure out the dosing levels, but you're not going to be changing the molecule in any manner. That's not part of the plan, is it?
That's correct. Our drug is equally applicable for acute or for chronic. For acute, you have the opportunity to tune the regimen. For example, perhaps a loading dose. So many NSAIDs, when used acutely, have a loading dose, and you can even have a tapering dose over those 10 days. So there's an opportunity to tune the regimen. That's what we're going to do to make it particularly effective. We're already effective. We can make it even more effective. We're going to take the 8 or 9 or 10 months it's going to take us to do that, and then we'll move into a confirmatory phase 2, and that will be our 5th phase 2, and then the phase 3 program is actually relatively modest for certainly compared with chronic. It's 2 10-day studies, 1 bunionectomy and 1 abdominoplasty, or colloquially called a tummy tuck.
So was there any evidence in the last trial that any of these health issues were coming up within the initial 10 or 14 days? Were those markers being tracked throughout the thing, or was it just done at the end? What I'm trying to figure out is, could have some of these issues been coming up with patients in the first week of the trial?
No, this trial we were taking blood to analyze, and you analyze it right in the clinic or right in the hospital. We were taking blood twice a week right from the get-go. So these issues happened on day 28 of a 28-day dosing. So it's a later issue. Now, there's always risk in drug development, of course, but we think that the risk is markedly less acutely, and we've not really, at the levels of exposure that we are planning for our drug, out of 623 patients who've been on our drug today, not one of them has had a liver issue at the levels of exposure that we anticipate that we're going to use, and then over the next year.
Pain is a complicated thing to measure because it's all self-reporting. You can't put a connector on a sensor on someone's head and saying, "Oh, you've got a level 8 of pain." And your pain trials are going to be on different types of pain. Do you have any indication that, or any risk that it could work on certain types of pain and not others, and then it would be shown to be not as effective in these acute pain markets?
Well, pain is always challenging. It's less difficult in acute than it is in chronic. So chronic, since it's such a large market, generally speaking, you go after an individual indication, and then that's the first approval you would get. So we were clearly going after osteoarthritis, and we're still working on that, but we were going after osteoarthritis, and so then you have to do osteoarthritis trials. They're relatively challenging pain trials for the reasons that you suggest. It's self-recorded pain. I mean, probably the worst one is low back pain, a massive issue in the world, but getting good pain scores on low back pain, they're all over the map. It's a bit like grabbing Jello, so it's a hard one to do. Osteoarthritis is less hard, but still relatively challenging. Probably the model that gives you that is simplest and the clearest against placebo is a bunionectomy, where you get these bunions removed from your feet. It's very painful, and so it's a particularly clear model. And for acute pain, generally speaking, that's the model. You have to do a hard tissue and a soft tissue. The hard tissue is, generally speaking, these days, most companies use bunionectomy. That's our plan. And for a soft tissue, it's a tummy tuck, abdominoplasty, also a pretty good model, better than and easier, far easier than osteoarthritis. To give you an example, for patients per group, the number, for statistical purposes, we'd have to have maybe 200, 225, even 250 people per group in an osteoarthritis trial. 40 to 60 does it in a bunionectomy trial. So you can see how much easier of a model it is. Plus, generally speaking, to get an acute pain label, for the pain and symptoms of acute pain, you for any type of acute pain, you do a bunionectomy and abdominoplasty. You don't have to repeat these for the different types of acute, the sub indications. So also kind of exciting. So they're less expensive, they're rapid, they're less risky from a pain point of view than the longer trials such as osteoarthritis.
I'm curious. We discussed this a little bit previously. Given the simplicity and the shorter term nature, how come Antibe went ahead with the chronic pain market first? It seems like the acute pain would have been a great sort of easier single or double, sort of using a baseball metaphor. We get it. It's a short trial. And then once you got that down, then kind of launch out into the chronic pain. Why did you start in that process of chronic pain first and then sort of pivoting a bit to the acute side?
I mean, that's a very astute observation, Martin. As a matter of fact, we had that conversation. I think you know that I have put together what we have formally call our partnership advisory board. I call it my dinner board because I have a dinner with these people about every 2 months. These are superstar pharmaceutical commercial executives such as Angus Russell, who built Shire, and Shire was sold for $70 billion. So very, very sophisticated business people. And I spent the better part of an hour and a half discussing that exact issue. Why don't we, this is about 3 years ago, why don't we, have a triple or a standing double in a baseball analogy with acute and then move on to chronic? I mean, we are a data-driven organization like any good biotech should be. And the data was just pointing us so strongly towards chronic, towards osteoarthritis, and that is a home run. So we went for it, but the analogy is like we're the only people with a COVID vaccine, but we are causing these heart issues in a small number of people. It's too many. So, but we're not apologetic. Some of our shareholders are going, you've missed. I mean, this is very difficult stuff. No other company has done what we've done in 50 years, so we're hardly apologetic. We're led by the data. So the data was showing us to go after chronic. We think we're going to solve this issue, but in the interim, we're now pivoting, and we can make the pivot very fast to acute, leveraging all of that data. The 2 large phase 2Bs we've already done are perfectly appropriate for demonstrating our efficacy and our GI safety from a proof of concept point of view. We have to do a confirmatory dose ranging regimen trial for, and then we can go on to our phase 3s.
Okay, when you presumably let's you get your phase 3 trials are successful, does the FDA or anyone say, yeah, it's for acute pain but only for bunionectomies or these other things, or once you're sort of they trial it on that and then doctors can prescribe it for any kind of acute short-term pain treatment?
We're certainly not going after bunionectomy. That happens to be the model that you use on a phase 3 trial.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the label is for acute pain.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
And you mentioned as well on the chronic pain side, it sounds like you haven't given up hope on there. Like there could be some reformulation or something, or to
absolutely. Without getting too scientific here, over the longer term for a small number of patients, well, the science, I mean, we were the ones to make this big discovery 20 years ago, and the science has just exploded and continues to move forward at a rapid pace around hydrogen sulfide. I mean, it's just fascinating. It's now known that every cell in our body makes hydrogen sulfide, for example. It's almost, every month there's another discovery. Well, in the past 12 months or so, other scientists have shown that the liver makes its own hydrogen sulfide along with glutathione in the glutathione production process, and uses both of these to deal with oxidative stress. And all NSAIDs cause oxidative stress, including our cells. And it looks like, I mean, we haven't fully confirmed this, but this is our hypothesis. It looks like that we are, in that small number of people over the longer term, down-regulating the body's natural production of hydrogen sulfide. And it's like the liver saying, oh my gosh, free lunch. You're giving us hydrogen sulfide, we'll slow down our own production of it in a smaller number of patients over the longer term. Now that we know that, or at least that's our pretty strong hypothesis, we can go to work on that. But it's science on the edge. We don't know whether that particular one is a 6-month solution or a 6-year solution. So we're doing it, but in parallel, of course, we're pivoting to acute.
All right. And so you do have a very healthy balance sheet here, which your market cap is trading below that. How far and through what stages can your cash balance take you into the future? That gets you for the next 12 months, 24 months, or what stages of your various trials does that get you through?
It goes well into 2024. We have other programs that we're working on, including inflammatory bowel disease. They're very, very exciting. They don't take a whole lot of money at the moment. About a year from now, they'll start taking more money, but we have the option. If we decide to just totally focus on our lead drug, we can fully fund it through the end of phase 3s. So, I mean, that's a fantastic position to be in. I mean, I find sometimes the market a strange beast, but if we were a brand new biotech that had 4 phase 2s, including this powerful proof of concept and fully funded for a fast phase 3, you would be at many, many multiples of your cash. You wouldn't be where we are. So I think the market is misunderstanding this a bit, but so be it. We have no need to go out to the market for a long time for money, if at all. Okay.
And can we talk just about the milestones that you've outlined in some of your news releases for the year, and what other types of news releases, or given where your stock is now, it's often investors are looking some kind of catalyst or some sort of, this sort of validates the next steps, which takes perceived risk off the table and lets the stock move up a bit. But I would think it's driven by a bunch of momentum right now. Could you just talk about what milestones investors should be expecting over the next 12 months?
Sure. We have, in 2 recent press releases, we have put out a number of milestones, trying to give the market full information and a lot of information, because we understand that they're looking at us, and we want to be able to provide that information to them. So, as I mentioned a bit earlier in this conversation, we have the opportunity to tune the regimen. Usually, you do that. Acute regimens are often different than a chronic regimen. So we are going to do the pharmacokinetic and the pharmacodynamic, these studies in volunteer humans over the next 9 months or so to fully essentially tune it for the optimum amount of pain relief, including a quick onset.
And that's the typical like take 3 pills a day with a meal, but you need to figure out exactly how you would tune that and figure that out.
I mean, 30% of NSAIDs when used in acute pain have a loading dose, for example, because you want that pain right up front. And so
can you clarify what loading dose is, just so we can all properly understand that?
Sure. Many drugs, antibiotics do this. Many pain drugs do this, particularly in acute. A loading dose is simply a larger dose the first time you take you take it. So, I mean, you can see it in postoperative pain. You need that extra, that extra amount of drug to deal with that pain, and then you can moderate. Then you have a lower dose going forward. So that's a very classic way of dealing with a whole series of symptoms, such as infection and also acute pain. So that's what a loading dose is. It's a larger dose the first time you take it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you'll be sorting that out. And then on the phase 2.
And we're initiating that in the first quarter. So coming up in the winter, and then we want to indeed, so we've told the market we're doing that. And then when that happens, they can check that off, that we're meeting our milestones. I mean, there is some perception in the market that we miss milestones. I mean, I think that is a misplaced perception. This is complicated science, and on the whole, we don't really miss milestones. But nonetheless, we're giving a fair number of milestone information to the market. We, just like we did for chronic, we did very extensive commercial studies done by third party, like well-respected global strategy consultancies who work for the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to go off and we already done some on acute, and then we're going to expand on these. And the main one we should have that information coming in the spring. We want to start our phase 2 in 2022. So after we figure out the dose, the regimen and the dosing, we want to do a confirmatory phase 2 to validate that dose, and then we'll meet with the FDA and be into our phase 3.
In phase 2, dosing is one of the key things that are measured. Are you going to be you don't know yet, but would there be like several dosing regimes that you try, like low, medium, and high, so to speak, and see how the relative effect is with those?
Yes, exactly. That confirmatory phase 2 with respect to dosing usually has 2 or 3 arms. We'll see at that point. At this point, we think 2 will be sufficient, but perhaps it's 3. You have exactly low, medium, and high. Right.
Okay, gotcha. And all right. We have a bunch of questions here from the audience, so I'm going to run through this and try to paraphrase them. Some of them we've already sort of or addressed or partially addressed here. So question, what can we expect from Antibe early 22? I think we hit that. Is there or could there still be a NASDAQ listing in the works, or is that going to maybe be pushed off until we get this acute pain data under control a bit?
Well, clearly there's a NASDAQ uplisting in the works, but you want to do it at the right time, so then you want to build up momentum. You, on the whole, want to go on to NASDAQ, with wind in your sails rather than the reverse. We had plans to go on to NASDAQ, but instead we did our Chinese partnering deal and then accepted that financing from Canaccord, and as a result, we're very well funded. And so myself and our board thought that rather than going to NASDAQ at that time, we'll accept those 2 deals, which we did do, and then you build up again. So this dosing regimen work starts to get completed, we're going to then start building up momentum to go on to NASDAQ at that time. We think it's a very strategic and a timing oriented decision to go on to NASDAQ, but we do, that is that is in our plans. Yeah.
And then a question here, what is the status of the agreement with Nuance Pharma? Have you received any payments from them? And what is the timeline for future payments?
Well, we signed our license deal. That license deal is filed on CDAR. It's an 80-page license deal. We received, of course, our upfront payment. I don't have the exact details, but there was another development milestone payment, but it was more to do with getting close to approval. I would think your readers can get it onto CDAR. It's a license agreement, so it is an agreement. We talked to all of our partners. Everyone gets it. This is biotech. So you have issues and you work through them. The pivot to acute works particularly well for Nuance because they've licensed an acute drug, an IV drug that you would come off IV and go right onto our drug. It's the same sales call and the same people. It fits up perfectly with their pipeline. So we're just we're going through all those conversations to explain that to them. But it's we're partners.
You mentioned IV. Is your drug trials all in pill form application? Yes, they are.
Though one of our research projects is potentially an intravenous formulation. That is awfully exciting, but that's a research project where this is otenaproxesul is exactly what it was, except you would take it for 10 days or so rather than chronically.
All right. There's a question here on the acute pain path and optimizing dosing. I think we've addressed that. I think this question's a bit out of place, but was the acute pain trial stopped and abandoned or just halted? That doesn't make
okay, well, it was an absorption, metabolism, and excretion study. So generally speaking, for a drug to get approved, you have to go through your phase 3s, but there are always several other studies that you have to do, and you tend to do them in parallel. And investors, these are details. Investors often don't focus on them, but you always have to show your metabolism. There could be other, studies about in combination with another drug, or that's why you meet with the FDA. But absorption metabolism is a key one, and it's often great to do it in two format, serially in 2 different studies, and so that's what we were doing. We did have, as is often the case, we did have an automatic pause requirement if we had 2 individuals or more that had a certain level of rise in these liver enzymes that all these drugs struggle with, including ourselves, and we hit that, so it was an automatic pause. But as I mentioned, almost everyone had finished the study. It was day 28 of a 28-day administration of a 28-day trial. So we have all of the data we need. And so there was a few more people who needed a few more days to finish. There wasn't any point in doing that. So that trial has now been concluded.
Is there any chance that maybe the people who had this liver reaction, I don't know, have certain genetic biomarkers or something where you could do trials? It's like, it's really good for chronic pain, except if you do a blood test and you have these kind of markers where there's a subset of the population that's easily and clearly identifiable and you could target them with it?
Not with the knowledge that the world has in 2021. Perhaps 20 years from now, perhaps. But this is a known issue with every anti-inflammatory painkiller, and we're facing it. We are working with a highly respected group of scientists out of North Carolina. This group was put together by a whole number of big pharma because liver issues are complicated. So about 10 years ago, this group got funded by many large pharmaceutical companies to do their study. It's essentially forming this simulation. The FDA respects them very much, and they've produced, this group has produced simulation software, which the FDA just has and just recently renewed. We're working very closely with them and are continuing to work. So we don't feel at this point in time, with the knowledge that we have in 2021, that there is some simple little genetic biomarker that can just isolate someone and take you out of that. It's a more common issue than that. We think it's all NSAIDs cause oxidative stress, including ours, and we think that the hydrogen sulfide is giving real protection, but at the same time, it's in a small group, it's down-regulating the body's natural production of hydrogen sulfide, which also provides the protection. So it's a fascinating scientific issue, not necessarily easy to solve. We might solve it in the next 6 months, as I said, or it might take us 6 years.
All right. There are a couple questions here regarding the management team in terms of, do you have any succession planning, and is the management team, the team you have involved right now, are they the right team, or do you maybe need to reposition or rehire anybody on the senior management side?
Right, and that sounds to me, Martin, as if you're putting that question in very, very nice and polite terms. So, but we're not as if we're some telecom company that has missed a sales target or so and is just not, doesn't really know how to market or something like this. It has nothing to do with it. These are complicated issues. It's like a vaccine company that's the only one able to produce something, and they're still now having a new issue that is complicated and new. It's drug discovery. We have a fantastic team, and people are pain and inflammation doctors and scientists, and we're very good at bringing on outside experts. And so everyone tosses around the word, the adjective world class. We have brought in truly, people on anyone knowledgeable's list of, the top 4 people in a certain area. One of them is working with us on this, including the liver, including pain trials. You talked about the difficulty of pain trials. Probably the best group, or many people think it's the best group. They're out of Los Angeles for phase 2 bunionectomy and abdominoplasty trials. They're already part of the team. I think this is absolutely, we have absolutely the right team. In terms of succession, well, once we get to commercialization, absolutely. We're not we're drug developers, not drug commercial people. And of course, we will then essentially replace ourselves, and we'll be working with partners by that time. Anyways, but at the moment we have a fantastic team.
All right, and there's some questions with negotiations with big pharma and partnerships. Given where you're at right now with the prior, you're in your pivot phase, trying to get, are there any chances for partnerships in the near term, or would potential new partnerships be waiting for additional data to come down the line?
They're going to wait for new data, as you would and I would, but it's going to come relatively quickly. So our plan is to for the acute market is to also do a target partner universe study. We'll do that in the spring or next summer or so. And we'll build on the work that we did for chronic pain. And then as the phase 2 is underway, then begin outreach. People are going to wait, are going to wait for that, and which is perfectly fine. We have a tremendous amount of money in the bank, so that is that's perfectly fine. It's our view.
Do you think like once you get that phase 2, those phase 2 trials out next year, is that when hopefully your phone would start ringing at that point?
Exactly. It's our view, for what it's worth, but and our the strategy consultancies that we use, it's their view also that, and it's just generally well known that an acute pain drug is generally speaking easier to partner than a chronic pain drug. Chronic pain drugs, you're really competing with the generics, and they take massive sales forces, so the universe is much, much smaller for an acute pain drug, it's so many more types of potential partners. So we think that'll be partnering will be much easier. So the need is out there. Of course, the world's trying to move away from opioids, and GI safety is still the number one concern of surgeons. So the need is there. So, and there's been no innovation in oral NSAIDs, and yet they're so widely used, and no innovation in 20 years. So should our dosing regimen, should we have a great dosing regimen and then confirm that, we don't anticipate we anticipated an exciting partnering time.
And I'm presuming, but this would be a prescribed drug. This just wouldn't be one that it'd be in a jar next to the pills of Tylenol and just one more drug on the shelf.
This will be a prescription drug. I mean, potentially way down the road, it might be an over-the-counter drug, but a prescription drug, I mean, that's a massive market. Yeah.
When you, asking questions from the audience here, when you secured the Chinese partnership, you had mentioned that you were working on other partnerships since this pickup. The chronic pain towel, is there still interest from other suitors or partners? I guess we've addressed that. They're going to be waiting for some more data.
There's all kinds of interest, but they're going to wait.
Yeah. Is the Nuance deal only for chronic pain indications, or are they still partners for acute pain as well?
We view them as partners for otenaproxesul.
Okay, whatever the usage is there. And what is the update on selling Cytogenics? How far are these talks?
Well, you can see in the financial statements that we've just recently filed that it's now an asset held for sale. And so, as a CEO of a public company, I try to obey not only the letter but also the spirit of the securities laws. That's not really something I could.
It's in process.
It's in process. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Can you elaborate on patent protection and realistic market share of the $13 billion if Otena is successful?
So just before we filed we put out our first press release about the pivot to acute. We filed a full patent that we're pretty excited for. It covers potential treatment regimens for otenaproxesul, and depending upon the regimen that we come up with, it could very well and likely, I think is fair to say, fit within that patent. Our lawyers judge that patent to be strong. In other words, another 20 years of patent protection. So that is fantastic. At the very least, of course, we're in no worse position than with for chronic, where we would have the maximum length of data exclusivity, which is the main way you get market protection these days. So it's only better. It's only better in terms of the market share. Well, post-operative pain is a $13 billion market. The vast majority of that is between opioids and NSAIDs. Opioids are bigger, but there's huge pressure to change that, and that it is changing. We would clearly be positioning ourselves as the NSAID of choice. So I think that your listeners, Martin, could use standard rules of thumb for new best-in-class drugs when they hit the market. Just use those rules of thumb.
Yeah. All right. If other drugs have the same issues and are approved, why not go straight to phase 3? Or I guess simplify it. Why do you need to? You've done so much work on this so far. Why do you need to do a phase 2? Can't you just go to phase 3?
Well, the acute pain is different than chronic. You have the opportunity of having a higher dose for shorter terms, and to have even more pain killing, and that's important. You want a certain rapidity of onset. It's not that important in a chronic drug, but you want to have pain killing, say, within 90 minutes or so with an acute drug. We just don't have any data on that. We know that we have very rapid, within 15 minutes, COX inhibition from our drug, and the way that these drugs work is by inhibiting the COX enzymes. But we don't have any information on from patients, of course. So there's a bunch of work to do to tune it. It's normal work to do.
All right. Well, it looks like we're out of questions here from the audience. So if you do have any questions that we haven't addressed, or anything that you've submitted that has not been addressed, I would have missed it at this point then. And please punch that into the chat channel. And while we wait to see if there are any other questions, out of everything we've discussed, is there anything you want to highlight, or anything that we maybe glossed over that you want to emphasize on in terms of where you've been and where you're going?
I mean, I think that the market should, your listeners, Martin, should sort of take a more realistic view. They sort of put us a tiny bit in the Canadian penalty box because of our AME trial, but when you look at the data that we have that is directly applicable to acute, and the team that we have, and the funding that we have, and the market needs, after all, I think that they should put all that together. The last thing I would say is, if they miss it now, but they email you or whatever with any questions, I try to be incredibly responsive. I get back to every single shareholder who emails me or phones me.
I've got it's hardly a question, but it says COVID-19 question mark. I guess with COVID-19, there is inflammation issues. I'm just guessing here, any applications to what you're doing to COVID?
We have a research program going on in COVID, but it's very, very early stages, and that's why we don't really talk about it much. I don't consider this material, so that's why I don't mind telling you. But we've had some very attractive results in test tubes. I mean, it's exciting, but there are hundreds of companies that have antivirals in test tubes. So perhaps someone has heard about that.
Okay. Dan, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us. I'd love to get you back on in a few months again after some more data points come out, and we can review and highlight some of that stuff. So thank you very much for taking the time and bringing us all up to date on where Antibe stands right now.
Most welcome, and that would be a pleasure, Martin.
All right. Cheers. Have a great day. Bye.